What is happening, everyone? Nathan here today to talk to you about the demise, the loss, whatever you want to call it, of our favorite Sandshark Pokemon, Garchomp here. There's been a lot of talk nowadays about how this Pokemon seems kind of poised to drop from overuse. There's a number of factors for that we're going to drop into, but it's sad to see because this is a Pokemon that has been one of the faces of competitive Pokemon for probably 12 years at this point, since it got introduced. It, of course, was banned in Gen 4, but ever since then, when it was allowed in overuse, it has lived up to that hype and been one of the best Pokemon ever in history. So first, we're going to talk about why that has been the case. Put a tweet out the other day talking about how is Enamorus the final nail in the Garchomp coffin, because it is immune to both stabs that Dragonite runs, normally runs boots too, and it can outspeed with its 106 base speed and immediately Oko Chomp with a Moonblast. I put this out and there was a lot of talk about it, a lot of talk about the fall off of Garchomp in general. A lot of people got really angry at me. Like, this person like absolutely lost their mind on me, and they said, "Oh no, Garchomp's actually secretly good because it can run Terra Steel, Choice Band, Iron Head, and all this shit." I mean, if you're running all this stuff to make Garchomp work, it's not going to be good. Spoiler alert. I actually said as much, and they totally freaked out on me. I'll let you guys pause that if you want to go through the absolute mania that happened there. But anyways, a lot of different people got mad at me. But let's talk about why the fact is. Because Enamorus is, I think, it's definitely bad because I think it's a really good Pokemon. I don't even talk about Enamorus Therian. It's going to be top 10, top 15 in usage, I would predict. And having a Pokemon like that just completely walls you and or forces you to run specific coverage in order to beat it, like Stonehenge, is obviously going to be a pretty big dent against you. But the key word there is the final nail in the coffin. This has been something that's been coming for a little while. Got a lot worse with the Pokemon Home release, but it's definitely been, in the works ever since Scarlet and Violet first came out. If we look at the sets that it runs in overused, the most predominant set right now is just a basic setup set. You've got spikes now, which is great. It's worth noting the Rocky Helmet, Rough Skin, Tank Garchomp sets have been like very niche and not terribly popular for a long time with Garchomp, just because you're not really using it to its max. Like, it's such a great attacking Pokemon. Why would you subject it to its defensive role? And to be fair, this role got a lot better with the addition of spikes, of course. It's one thing if you do all this to dedicate a Pokemon just to getting up Stealth Rocks, if you can get up Stealth Rocks and several layers of spikes, it's great. Of course, Rocky Helmet and Rough Skin combined, so if somebody U-turns on you churlishly, then you're going to get taking like 30-something% while they get up Stealth Rocks or whatever. If they try to set up on you while you're going for all this stuff, great, no problem. I'll just hit you with a decently hard-hitting Dragon Tail. It's all great. However, I would posit there are lots of different Pokemon that can do this role decently well. There's a couple I come up with, but the main one is going to be a fellow defensive ground-type Stealth Rock and Spiker, Ting Lu. Ting Lu has much better defenses, especially if you account for its ability, which gives it a functionally really high SPDF. It can also pivot out attackers with Whirlwind. And it hits pretty hard with EQ too. It's not like it's way weaker than Garchomp. You can even run Vessel of Ruin if you want to just easily take out half of their health like that, right? So I would make the argument that Ting Lu is better at Garchomp's job than Garchomp is. If you want a pure Stealth Rocker, there's also a lot of better Pokemon like Great Tusk or Garganacl. I mean, Lander's just re-entered the tier and it's a great rocker. I mean, hell, you could even run Hydreigon Stealth Rocks nowadays, I'm pretty sure. Like, there's all kinds of options. So yes, this is, I think, if you're going to make an argument for Garchomp staying relevant, it is this niche of being a decently strong, decently fast Stealth Rocker and Spiker who can really heavily punish contact moves with this combination here. Like, hell, if you're up against an Urshifu Rapid Strike, they could, I don't know what the number is, but they would die before you do by using Surging Strikes. It's absolutely crazy. But again, I just don't know if it's got that same niche. Normally, you kind of hang your hat on Dragon Ground being a decent defensive typing. But nowadays, Dark is actually surprisingly good defensive typing too. So Ting Lu I almost prefer in that department as well. Okay, so we're done talking about this defensive Pokemon, but instead now let's talk about the offensive Garchomp that we've known like being the face of competitive overuse for so long. There's a bunch of different sets we can run here, but we're going to be talking about just the classic Swords Dance, Earthquake, Dragon Claw set. Pretty common. Nowadays, you can kind of change this up a lot. You can run Stone Edge, you can run Fire Fang, you can run all kinds of stuff to try to mix and match it. I think we are starting to see the effects of having such a mediocre physical stab in Dragon Claw and or Outrage. Dragon Claw is just objectively weak nowadays. It's crazy to say. It's perfectly fine and average in Gen 4 or Gen 5, but now it really doesn't cut it. Everybody's got such more like effective and versatile stab with at least secondary effects. Like, this move should have flinch on it if it was made nowadays. 30% flinch chance like Iron Head. Your other option, of course, is Outrage, but Outrage locks you into the move and it makes revenge killing you extremely easy and not that hard at all, especially if you have a Fairy type available. So it's it's very limited as a result. The lack of Scale Shot is definitely hurting it. We're going to come back to that in a second. But if I'm going to be running a Swords Dance Pokemon like this in this general speed tier, I'm probably running Baxcalibur instead. The offensive typing of Ground Dragon used to be really coveted before, because any grounded Steel types that would wall your Dragon types are now destroyed by Ground. But nowadays, the most prominent Steel type is going to be Corviknight, so it doesn't really matter much. It's actually worse. Whereas Baxcalibur has an excellent Icicle Spear, which handles that just fine. Glaive Rush, hell, if we want to talk about good offensive Dragon Stab, 1,000 times better. You get all the power of Outrage and none of the consequences. Sure, you're open to being revenge killed pretty easily too, but you're swapping out every day of the week right there, right? As long as you have a defensive core that can handle it. You also have priority. You know, loaded dice plus Icicle Spear is hitting really, really, really hard. Even if you're not, I'd think I'd almost prefer Icicle Crash to Dragon Claw. It's close with that lowered accuracy, but I think you take it just for the chance of a flinch. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of a harder hitting, better Pokemon nowadays. It's slower, sure, but at this point in the metagame, you know, 101, like that's another thing. Like 102 speed tier used to be absolutely, like 100 was great, and 102 is superb because you just get like the 1-up on all the base 100s. Nowadays, that's not the case, and like 110 is almost that point nowadays. 105, I would say at least, is the new 100, right? And so if you're not at that point, the difference between 87 and 102 becomes a lot less noticeable, a lot less important. This is not going to be prevalent in many people's minds, but Choice Scarf Garchomp used to really run the tier, certainly in black and white, but I think it was even got a bit of usage in Gen 6 too, as just being, again, we take a look at that speed tier, throw a Choice Scarf on it, and it's outspeeding just about anything you can shake a stick at. It hits hard and hard really well. There wasn't as much threat of the Outrage Earthquake combination being walled. But yeah, I mean, this used to be a fantastic combination that I know, again, in Gen 5 at least, used to be an absolute demon. Landers comes in and it's just doing it way better. It's a pivot. You know, you don't have the Outrage Stab anymore, but again, you don't really need it. The Steel types that are coming in are coming anyways. It's better to pivot in that case than to have an available Rock Slide, which is going to be doing too much damage. So if you want like a, you know, and this of course is a land versus Intimidate too, and it's a lot more versatility, much better defensive typing. So if you're going to have a Pokemon that's coming as a Scarfer, you're using the Landers in that case. And I mentioned it before, but what really saw offensive Garchomp, because it was kind of like last generation for a long time, and then it got Scale Shot, and now we're like, holy shit, like this is actually, I think I just misspoke right there. I was wrong, because I think it had Scale Shot from the outset once it got introduced in Crown Tundra. I think that's right. But anyways, it was the strongest it's been in 10 years once it got Scale Shot last generation. It boosts your speed. It gives you the biggest problem with this. Fire Fang with Swords Dance and Life Orb was enough to easily 2-hit KO a Corviknight. And Earthquake KO'd everything else, honestly. It was a little bit luck dependent. You had to get multiple hits on Scale Shot. You had to hit. You're a little bit weak to priority attackers like Bullet Punch. But this was a top 5, like, easy, no doubt about it, Pokemon last generation, at least in usage stats. But even if this were to come in nowadays, I certainly think it would get a boost, and I don't think we would see Garchomp get bounced from over you like we're talking about here. But I still think Roaring Moon, in terms of being a Dragon Dance setter upper, sorry, is maybe a little bit more effective for a couple reasons. One, this is a generation of terrestrialization. Most bans we're seeing are motivated by how effectively you can abuse terrestrialization. And Roaring Moon's a fantastic one. There's lots of different sets you can run, like Stab Ironhead, like Terra Dark Crunch to just nuke everything, including those Corviknights that are coming in at you, which you can easily handle with your Stab now. But let's not forget the now Stab 120 base power flying acrobatics, right? So Roaring Moon is a fantastic user of terrestrialization. Like this set, I don't believe would be in the same way, personally speaking. You could Terra Dragon probably and break through a lot of things with Swords Dance and Life Orb, but I think at that point I'd prefer the Terra Dark Roaring Moon. Your base attack is a little bit higher, your base speed is way higher. You're just functionally a better Pokemon at that specific role. So we find this Pokemon that is kind of just a B across the board. And when we think of power creep nowadays, I think it's easy to think of Pokemon like Roaring Moon, which is fair, where you just see everything and all the sliders are just pushed up a whole nother notch than what we're used to. We go, holy shit, what were they thinking making this Pokemon? But the way I see power creep nowadays is a little bit different, where it's just more specialized Pokemon are coming out, and more specialized Pokemon are better at doing what Garchomp does. An all-rounder like Garchomp is kind of feeling itself pushed out of the metagame. I actually thought the best set last generation wasn't Fire Fang Scale Shot. I thought it was Stealth Rock, because that way, with this set last generation, you can effectively threaten with a Swords Dance and force opponent to go out to a defensive counter, or else you got swept, 5-0, whatever the number is. But you would anticipate that defensive wall coming in and get up stealth rocks so effectively. Whereas if it was a weaker stealth rocker, you don't have the same threat. So Garchomp, that's why I saw it as the ultimate all-rounder last generation. And yes, again, it had the edges taken off of that without Scale Shot. But the idea is still the same of all these new Pokemon having hyper-specific roles, hyper-specific Great Swords Dancer, hyper-specific Hazard Setter, hyper-specific, Dragon Dance Acrobatics. Like, these are like very narrow roles that do the specific thing that you would tilt your Garchomp towards more perfectly. So that's kind of how I see it. There's a lot of talk. I may put out a video on Gen 5 overused, and that was also generation famous for its power creep, of course. And I talked about how power creep is sometimes overrated, wherein if you add, so let's say Garchomp is the best Pokemon in Gen 4, right? And you add, or let's say it's of a tier with Tyranitar, another pseudo legendary. And every generation, you add 5 new Pokemon of that general tier. So in Gen 5, you get Keldeo and Landorus and Ferrothorn. And in Gen 6, you get more Pokemon of that general tier, like the new fairy-typed Clefable, Toxapex, some Mega Pokemon. I'm probably forgetting someone, but you get the idea. Like, every generation is going to get a couple of new Pokemon of that tier, just even if it has the exact same amount every generation. So in Gen 4, where Garchomp would have been one of the only 3 or 6 or 7 Pokemon of that general power level back then, you got 5 more in Gen 5, 5 more in Gen 6, 5 more in Gen 7, 5 more in Gen 8. Now we're in Gen 9, and all of a sudden, every Pokemon of the tier, there's now 40 Pokemon of that general power level now, right? Pokemon like Cleaver would have broken the metagame in Gen 5, and now it's just kind of right? It's all right. But that's the idea, is that power creep is naturally going to happen. But I do, despite that whole long caveat I just went on, I do still think that Scarlet and Violet is more extreme power creep than we've seen before. So you take all that and you dial it up by 11. So now it's like not just Garchomp Pokemon populated in tier. It's like, Garchomp plus 1 level Pokemon, if that makes sense. Like a little bit of pushing the sliders up a little bit. Pokemon like that are now populating the tier, where, Annihilate's getting banned, but that was in contention for a while. And Pokemon like, I don't know. I mean, Dragapult is still great in the tier, but it's not like one of one. King Ambit, Bisharp. Think about how relevant Bisharp was in Gen 5, and it just got a whole freaking evolution off of it. Great Tusk, like everything is just kind of a +1 and all that, right? I talk about that with Ting Lu, but if I'm gonna be using a Stealth Rocker again, Great Tusk is probably the better answer. It's got a better move pool too at that rate. It's got a better dual stab for breaking through Corviknights. The fact that even Landorus, I know Landorus lost stuff, but the fact that even Landorus is in contention to like be falling off this generation speaks a lot to Garchomp. So this has been a long video. I probably lost most people who are watching at this point, but I did actually put some work just for my own curiosity's sake, and I tracked every bit of usage that Garchomp has seen since it's been on the overused ladder. It took me about an hour, but you can actually use this to see Garchomp's usage percentage and usage rank. And I guess I shouldn't remove myself here. Hold on a beat. So the red line is the usage rank, and that just means where they are in overuse. So you want to be low. There was a little while, of course, where it wasn't in Gen 8. It wasn't included until later DLC, so it's not going to be included there. But for the most part, the lower it is, the better it is. So I talked about how it kind of hit its stride when it had Scale Shots introduced. That's going to be right here in this zone, where it's perennially a top 5, Pokemon in usage. Whereas the generation before, it was kind of in that top 10-ish zone. It flirted with the teens for a little bit there, but it's only in the 20s. The blue is going to be its usage percent number. Again, pretty consistent for the most part. You normally see it hover between its peak at 17%, which we see over here, but its floor is normally like 7%, I'd say. Yeah, so it has about 5 years there of being a 10% usage mod, which doesn't sound so high, but it's double the amount needed in order to be considered an overused Pokemon. So you're overused just like solidly. Like even when its usage drops to 21%, it's still, number 21 in overused, it's still, a 7% used mod. It is still very easily, no sweat, OU Pokemon, which is worth noting is lower than it is nowadays. It's possible that all this like hype and all this new Pokemon Home Pokemon coming out, all this shit is complete overreaction on our part, and it'll find a way to stay relevant like it always does. I don't know. It's hard for me to say with any certainty, but power creep has played a role this generation, and this seems like a Pokemon that, if not just for the fact that these numbers that made it so outrageous before are now not so outrageous, and its specific roles are now done more specifically. I'm definitely butchering that. Doesn't matter. You get the point. It's just a Pokemon that's lost its way a little bit. It's the reasons you would use it are no longer as exciting as they once were. So anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed. I'm curious to see what everyone says in the comments about whether they think this Pokemon will fall off, whether we think it's gonna bounce back. If it got Skill Shot, do we think it would be back to normal? I think a lot of people assume it would be because that was such a huge factor in its relevance last generation. I'm not so sure. I really not. I'm not. I think it would be like of a kind now with Baxcalibur and Roaring Moon. But I think in the average team build, I'm probably leaning towards a Garchomp myself. Granted, Garchomp has a better defensive typing than those guys, so maybe the all-rounder aspect of it comes back with a Skill Shot. Impossible to say. But I'm looking forward to see what you guys say. I'll catch you next time. Take it easy.